Hi ka-learners! Today, we will learn about what feedback is and how to effectively use it. A very important part of communication is giving constructive feedback. This lesson will tell you what it is as well as how to best send it to the person you are communicating with. Can you recall a conversation in which somebody said something that hurt your feelings? Or try to remember an instance in which you sent messages that you knew might hurt other people. Was communication effective because of this? Were you able to get the results you wanted? If you can go back in time and say things again differently, how would you say them? At the end of this lesson, you should be able to: Number 1, define what feedback is along with its different types. Number 2, identify the steps in giving constructive feedback. And number 3, know how to transform feedback into constructive ones for better communication. The process of communication involves giving and receiving feedback. Feedback is a response to a statement or a comment. It is a reaction to something you have heard or observed, and it is usually spoken, but it can also be written. Lastly, it can be conveyed and communicated through body language. Giving effective feedback is an art. It is also a skill which, unfortunately, not everybody has. Sometimes, we express disapproval to certain behaviors or dissatisfaction or disappointment with the person's work or performance. In instances like these, you have to be very careful in giving feedback. You should be sensitive in choosing your words carefully to avoid hurting someone's feelings. Before you speak, it is important to think first about what you are going to say, maybe even several times, and how best to say it. Study this conversation between Paul and Mark. If you were Paul, how would you feel? Do you think the feedback was effective? If you were to change the statement of Mark, how would you say it? Most people would feel bad upon receiving such feedback. It communicates rejection. To make it more effective, it can be changed to, "Your clothes are not really appropriate for the occasion. Why don't you change first before coming to my party?" Or, "I think you would feel better if you changed into something more appropriate for the party." If you received that kind of feedback instead of the one in the dialogue, would you have felt better? Chances are you would. You see how the right choice of words can change a destructive feedback to a constructive one? In giving feedback, it is important to follow the principle of putting yourself in the other person's shoes to make it more effective. This means imagining how you would react if you heard your own feedback. This is an important principle that one should follow to make communication work. Constructive feedback is a response that aims not to hurt or put down other people. Constructive feedbacks are statements that are carefully worded so as to consider the receiver's feelings to achieve the desired results. Meanwhile, criticisms are statements of evaluation. A criticism is basically a form of feedback. It is a reaction to a statement or a message. There are two types of criticisms. These are destructive and constructive criticisms. Study this example of a destructive criticism. What do you think of the statement? How would you feel if you were the receiver? How would you react? Would you know what to do with the suggestions the sender gave? This example of destructive criticism shows ineffective communication. Instead of making people react well and take the same corrective action toward the speaker's desired goal, nothing is achieved. This is because feelings are hurt and intentions are not made clear. Study the following example of a constructive feedback in a similar situation. If you were the receiver, how would you feel? Would you be more inclined to act according to the wishes of the sender? Why? Notice that in both instances, the message was that Joey's work was not quite satisfactory. But in the second example, the message is given in a non-hurting, non-antagonistic way. If criticisms are given constructively, they would be taken into account more easily. This is because feelings are not hurt in the process. Hurt feelings usually make people less eager to work. People who feel bad about themselves don't perform well. Constructive criticisms or feedback leads to effective communication and ultimately better results. It aims to encourage and lift up and not destroy or put down people. Constructive feedback inspires positive actions and avoids hurting the feelings of others. Wouldn't people be happier if everybody knew how to give constructive feedback? Start with yourself. Study how to give constructive feedback. Here are the steps on how to give constructive feedback. Number 1, think first before giving feedback. Determine if the feedback is really necessary before saying anything. Number 2, state clearly why feedback is needed. Knowing the aim in giving feedback serves as a guide on how the feedback itself is to be made. What do you think is the purpose of the feedback in this example? The purpose of the above feedback is to question why the meeting did not start on time. It could give a signal that the meeting should start promptly next time. Number 3, choose your words carefully. Avoid words and expressions that can hurt someone's feelings. Focus on the situation and not on the mistakes of the receiver. Look at the following criticisms. Note how a destructive criticism can be rewarded to become constructive. You can make your own variation for each criticism. Number 4, emphasize the receiver's positive points and avoid fault-finding. Emphasizing a person's merits promotes self-esteem and encourages people to act toward your desired results. The answers given are just some of the possible answers. You can have your own variations. Discuss your answers with your instructional manager or facilitator if you are not sure if they are right. Number 5, start your feedback with encouraging words and explain why it is necessary. If a hurting word is unavoidable, explain why they are being said. Start your feedback with encouraging words and positive comments. This lessens the blow of the unavoidable hurting words. Here are some examples of encouraging statements. Practice saying them aloud. You can use these statements when giving constructive feedback. Number 6, after giving feedback, ask for the receiver's reaction. This will help you assess the situation and determine if further feedback or clarification is needed. Here are some ways to ask for reactions or feedback from your receiver. Practice saying them aloud. Lastly, make follow-up feedback when needed. This is done to emphasize important points and make sure that the communication process is effective. Below are some expressions that you can use. Study them, then say them aloud. It's time for a self-quiz. For the first quiz, complete the following statements used in giving constructive feedback. Then, practice saying them aloud. For the second quiz, look at this illustration and change the given feedback into a constructive one. Compare your answers to the matching answer key of this lesson when you check into your online LMS account. They will give you an idea of how destructive feedback can be rephrased or restated into constructive ones. Your answer may not be exactly the same as the ones given. The important thing is that you already know what a constructive feedback is. If you feel that you have already learned well from this lesson, you may proceed to the next lesson. To summarize, constructive feedback is a response or reaction given to a particular statement or situation. It aims to correct and not to destroy, to achieve results and not to hurt feelings. The following are the steps in giving constructive feedback. Number 1, think first before giving feedback. Number 2, state clearly why feedback is needed. Number 3, choose your words carefully. Number 4, emphasize the receiver's positive points and avoid fault finding. Number 5, start your feedback with encouraging words. Number 6, after giving feedback, ask for the receiver's reaction. And lastly, make follow-up feedback when needed. And there you have it! Now that you know how to transform criticism and destructive feedback into constructive feedback, you can finally relate with the people around you better.